Imagine waking up one day and realizing that almost everything you chase, the relationships, the desires, the small indulgences, even the ambitions you once held so proudly, has carried within it a quiet poison. You sit on the edge of your bed, staring into the half-light of dawn, and it dawns on you. So much of what you long for has, in one way or another, wounded you. And yet, despite knowing this, despite feeling the sting of consequence again and again, you still hunger for it. Why? Why do we crave what we know will ultimately undo us? You see it in obvious ways. The addict returning to the bottle, the smoker lighting the next cigarette even as their lungs collapse, the gambler throwing one last desperate bet into the abyss. But it's also subtler, less visible. It's in the way someone repeatedly chooses the same kind of partner who will break them, the way a person sabotages opportunities that could free them, the way comfort lulls us into mediocrity even as it robs us of vitality. The human condition is riddled with these contradictions, knowing and yet not changing, seeing and yet still walking into the fire. It's as though there is a part of us addicted to suffering itself, a shadow that whispers not in logic but in compulsion. A strange, haunting paradox that we, creatures capable of reflection and foresight, will still stretch our hands toward the very flames that have burned us before. Pause here and ask yourself, what is the thing in my life I keep reaching for, knowing it will hurt me? Maybe it's not a substance but a thought pattern, a way of belittling yourself that has become strangely comforting. Maybe it's the endless scrolling through distractions, even as your soul quietly withers from neglect. Maybe it's ambition that looks noble on the surface, but secretly erodes your joy. Isn't it unsettling that your mind, supposedly the tool of your freedom, can become the architect of your prison? We live in a world obsessed with progress, efficiency, and self-control. Yet beneath the surface, most of us are quietly enslaved by invisible cravings. We think we are choosing freely, but are we? Or are we simply repeating the patterns carved into us long ago, prisoners of desires that were never truly ours to begin with? Imagine looking at yourself from the outside, a figure wandering through life, compelled by unseen strings, pulled toward objects of desire as if hypnotized. You know that food will leave you bloated, yet you consume it. You know that toxic relationship will leave you hollow, yet you return. You know that the comfort of procrastination will rob you of your future, yet you surrender to it. It is almost comical if it weren't so tragic. And the question grows heavier. Do we truly want what we want? Or are we trapped in wanting what destroys us? Philosophers and psychologists alike have circled around this paradox. Dostoevsky once suggested that humans are not rational creatures, seeking their best interest, but rather beings who rebel against what is best for them, sometimes precisely because it is best for them. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the hidden self that compels us into destructive patterns we can't consciously explain. Schopenhauer saw the will itself, the endless, blind striving for satisfaction, as the root of our misery. But even without citing great thinkers, the evidence is already written in your own life. How many times have you knowingly chosen against yourself? How many times have you heard the small inner voice warning you, only to smother it beneath a tide of craving? And how many times after the damage was done, did you whisper to yourself, never againly to repeat it? There is something profoundly human about this cycle. To crave is to live. To crave what destroys us is to confront the dark undercurrent of that life. It is not simply weakness. It is a mirror reflecting something deeper about the psyche, something that cannot be dismissed as mere bad habit. And so we arrive at the great question. What force drives us to desire what we know will harm us? Is it biology, an evolutionary trick that once kept us alive, but now betrays us in modern form? Is it psychology, the wounds of childhood replaying themselves endlessly in our adult choices? Is it society, engineering our desires to fuel systems that profit from our pain? Or is it something more existential, or kind of rebellion against life itself, a longing for the abyss dressed up as desire? You do not yet need the answer. In fact, the discomfort of not knowing is the very point. Sit with it. Feel the contradiction. Pressing against your chest, the awareness that your life, like everyone's, is already shaped by this paradox. We crave what destroys us. If that is true, then what does it say about the nature of human freedom? The stage is set. To go deeper, we must unmask the hidden problem, its psychological roots, its philosophical depth, and its societal machinery. The craving for what destroys us is not a surface flaw, is the symptom of something buried deep. Something older than our rational mind, older even than the civilizations that try to discipline us with rules and morality. To understand it, we must dig beneath the layers of habit and culture, down into the roots of the human psyche itself. Think of the human mind as a house. The top floor is the conscious self, the thoughts you hear, the goals you declare, the promises you make. This is where you say, I will quit tomorrow. I'll do better. I will choose differently. Beneath that polished floor lies the basement, the unconscious. It is dark, cluttered, filled with memories, instincts, and unhealed wounds. You rarely descend into it willingly, yet it is the basement that controls the wiring of the entire house. And what you call choice is often just the echo of what the basement has already decided. Carl Jung named this basement the shadow. Not merely the repressed anger or shame we carry, but the entirety of what we refuse to face in ourselves. The shadow is not evil in itself. It is simply what has been denied. But denial gives it power. And so, the shadow leaks into our lives in disguised forms. Self-sabotage, destructive desire, obsessions we cannot resist. When you crave what harms you, it is often the shadow tugging at the strings, forcing you to reenact the very thing you've buried. But why would the mind sabotage its own survival? To answer that, we must leave psychology for a moment and step into philosophy. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that the fundamental drive of life is not reason or morality, but will. Will is blind, irrational, insatiable. It pushes us to desire, to strive, to consume, even when satisfaction is impossible. Desire fulfilled only gives birth to new desire. Pleasure achieved is quickly followed by emptiness. Life, in its bleak conclusion, becomes a pendulum swinging between craving and boredom. Within this view, it is not surprising that we are drawn to destructive cravings. Destruction at least interrupts the monotony, at least promises intensity. Nietzsche, however, offers another lens. For him, destruction is often a disguised form of creation. To crave what undoes us may be the psyche's way of forcing transformation, a kind of psychological alchemy. The old self must collapse so that a stronger self can emerge. Pain, he argued, is not the enemy of growth, but its very condition. This sense, destructive craving is not mere pathology, but a challenge. Will you be broken by it, or will you forge meaning through it? Still, not all destruction leads to growth. Much of it simply cycles endlessly, leaving people diminished, hollow. This is where modern psychology provides another clue: the concept of trauma. Trauma imprints itself not just in memory, but in the nervous system, shaping the way we perceive safety, love, and identity. Gabor Mate, who has worked extensively with addiction, suggests that destructive cravings are not about seeking pleasure, they are about escaping pain. Addiction is not the pursuit of euphoria. It is the desperate attempt to numb what is unbearable inside. The drug, the toxic relationship, the self-sabotage, these are not random errors, but survival strategies misfiring.
Seen through this lens,
Craving destruction is a form of self-medication. The very thing that harms you also soothes you, even if only briefly. The cigarette calms anxiety even as it corrodes the lungs. The bottle numbs loneliness even as it deepens it. The return to the abusive partner quiets the terror of abandonment, even as it repeats the wound. Each destructive act is both poison and medicine, curse and comfort. And then there is society, the invisible hand shaping our desires. Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, warned that the most effective form of control is not through pain, but through pleasure. Give people enough distractions, enough synthetic gratifications, and they will enslave themselves willingly. Modern consumer. Culture has perfected this art. Fast dopamine, endless scrolling, curated fantasies of status and beauty. We are taught from birth not only what to desire, but that our worth is measured by the intensity with which we pursue those desires. Here lies another dimension of the problem. Our destructive cravings are not just personal, they are profitable. Entire industries depend on our inability to stop. The food industry engineers hyper-palatable products that override satiety signals. The social media industry designs platforms to exploit psychological vulnerabilities, feeding us novelty and outrage until we can no longer look away. Even the economy itself thrives on a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. To heal in such a system is almost an act of rebellion. And yet, even if we strip away society, trauma, and philosophy, we are still left with a haunting truth. Craving destruction may be bound into the fabric of what it means to be human. To desire is to risk being consumed by desire. To live is to flirt with the abyss. It's the very same instinct that drives us toward love, creation, and exploration, also drives us toward obsession, excess, and collapse. Perhaps this is the core contradiction. We are not designed for safety. We are designed for intensity. And sometimes, intensity wears the mask of destruction. But if that is the case, then we must ask, what is the cost of living this way? What happens when a life is governed by cravings that slowly erode it from within? The problem is no longer abstract. It bleeds into relationships, careers, cultures, and generations. To see the full scope of the danger, we must now turn to the unseen consequences, the way this hidden force quietly reshapes not only individuals, but the world itself. Stand still for a moment and look around you, not at the world's surface glitter, but at the undercurrents pulsing through ordinary lives. Notice the tired eyes behind smiling selfies, the restless scrolling through endless feeds, the silent despair in crowded trains where no one speaks. These are not isolated details. They are signs of something deeper, the quiet consequences of craving what destroys us. The problem is not only that we desire harmful things, the deeper danger is that we normalize them. We weave them into the very structure of our days until destruction wears the mask of ordinary life. Take the body as the first battlefield. Destructive. Cravings carve themselves into our flesh and bones. The endless pursuit of processed foods, stimulants, and dopamine drips reshapes our biology, leaving epidemics of obesity, burnout, and disease. Neurologists tell us that each repetition of a destructive habit etches neural pathways deeper, until the brain itself is rewired to anticipate pain disguised as pleasure. We are literally sculpting our nervous systems to serve the very forces that undo us. But the consequences go beyond the body. They seep into the mind. The craving for destruction quietly teaches us to distrust ourselves. Each relapse, each broken promise, plants the seed of self-betrayal. Over time, you no longer believe your own words. You declare, "I will stop," but a whisper follows. You won't. This erosion of self-trust is catastrophic. Without trust in oneself, freedom collapses. You become an observer of your own life, rather than its author. Worse still, destructive craving often disguises itself as love. How many relationships are built, not on genuine intimacy, but on the repetition of trauma, two wounds magnetized to each other? The abused child grows into the adult who unconsciously seeks partners who mirror that abuse. Not because it is fulfilling, but because it is familiar. We crave what we know, even when what we know is toxic. This is how generational wounds persist. Trauma becomes a family heirloom, passed down not through words, but through the choices we can't stop making. On the societal level, the consequences magnify. Culture addicted to destruction becomes a culture of distraction. Entire populations lose the ability to sit in silence, to reflect, to endure discomfort. The moment unease arises, we reach for the next hit, another video, another purchase, another fix. A society that cannot face its own shadow cannot evolve. It simply numbs itself into oblivion. And when destruction is profitable, industries thrive on our wounds. Social media feeds are not neutral. They are designed to exploit attention, anger, envy, and lust. Junk food corporations engineer flavors to hijack the palate. Even news outlets prey on fear because fear glues our eyes to the screen. The consequence? A population perpetually stimulated but spiritually starved. A world more connected than ever, yet lonelier than ever. The tragedy is not only external, it is existential. Each craving that destroys us pulls us further from who we might have become, the wasted hours, the broken promises, the half-lived potential they accumulate. We rarely notice the theft in real time because the losses come in small increments, a few minutes here, a single decision there. But years later, we look back and realize a haunting truth. We have been slowly consumed. There is also a political dimension to this. Citizens addicted to their own distractions rarely rise against systems of exploitation. Why would they, when the screen offers endless novelty, when consumerism promises identity in the form of brands, when substances soothe the ache of discontent? In this way, craving what destroys us is not merely personal weakness. It becomes a tool of governance. The more addicted we are, the easier we are to control. And still, the most devastating consequence is subtle. It is not illness or broken trust or systemic exploitation. It is the quiet death of meaning. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the concentration camps, argued that the deepest human drive is not pleasure, as Freud believed, but meaning. Without meaning, suffering becomes unbearable. With meaning, even suffering can be endured. But when our cravings dominate us, meaning erodes, we chase substitutes, the high of a purchase, the fleeting thrill of attention, the temporary numbness of intoxication. These fragments feel like life, but they are hollow echoes. And slowly, without noticing, we become estranged from what could have been meaningful. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat in silence without reaching for distraction? When was the last time you endured discomfort instead of escaping it? When was the last time you chose the hard but meaningful path over the easy but empty one? The answer for many is unsettling. And so the unseen consequences of craving destruction are not only measurable in statistics of addiction or illness, they are measurable in the dimming of human spirit, the shrinking of imagination, the erosion of resilience. A species capable of awe, art, and transcendence is reduced to chasing dopamine hits. A life that could have been a symphony is reduced to background noise. Yet, and here is the cruel irony, we rarely see it while we are inside it. Like fish in polluted water, we adapt, calling it normal. Only when we step back do we realize how much of our vitality has been stolen. This realization brings us to a crossroads. If the hidden problem explains why we crave destruction, and the unseen consequences reveal what it costs us, then the next question demands itself. Is there a way out? Is rebellion possible not against society alone, but against our own compulsions? The answer will not be simple. To break free requires more than willpower or discipline. It requires a radical reorientation of perspective, a willingness to face discomfort, and the courage to walk into the unknown without guarantees. And that is where we must now go. Into the rebellion, the path of breaking free. Rebellion does not begin with the raising of fists or the shouting of slogans. It begins in silence. It begins in the moment you look at yourself without the usual disguises and admit, I am not free. To rebel against destructive craving is to stand against the oldest tyrant, your own compulsions. And unlike external oppressors, this tyrant cannot simply be overthrown. It is part of you rooted in biology, history, and society. 2. Fight it is to risk becoming entangled in endless war with yourself, but to ignore it is to live as a prisoner. The only way forward is not suppression, but transformation. How do we begin such a rebellion? First, by embracing discomfort. We live in an age that has taught us to flee from pain at all costs. Yet as Nietzsche warned, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. If craving destruction is often the attempt to numb pain, then freedom lies not in numbing, but in learning to face pain directly. Sit with the loneliness instead of drowning it in distraction. Endure the silence instead of rushing to fill it with noise. This is not romantic advice. it's excruciating. But rebellion always is. Second, by confronting the shadow, Jung insisted that what we refuse to face in ourselves will control us from the dark. The work of shadow integration means turning toward the very impulses you fear, naming them, understanding them, and reclaiming the energy locked inside them. If you crave destruction, ask yourself, what wound is this desire protecting? What truth have I buried beneath it? To bring the shadow into the light is not to erase it, but to render it conscious. Once conscious, you can choose. Third, by cultivating awareness. Neuroscience confirms what the ancients already knew. Attention is destiny. Whatever you focus on strengthens. The rebellion begins with reclaiming attention from those who would hijack it. This may mean turning off notifications, limiting consumption of engineered media, or practicing meditation, not as an escape, but as training. Each time you notice the craving rise and do not immediately obey it, you carve a new possibility into the brain. Freedom is not one grand act, but 1,000 small refusals. Yet rebellion is not only inward, it is also outward. We must recognize that craving what destroys us is not a private defect, but a socially engineered condition. To rebel is to see through the illusions of consumer culture, to reject the false promises of quick fixes, to stop mistaking distraction for fulfillment. It is to reclaim values that cannot be bought: silence, connection, depth, meaning. This too is painful, for it requires swimming against the current of an entire culture. But every act of resistance plants a seed. For another, still, rebellion cannot be sustained by no alone. To break free from destructive craving, one must find a greater yes. Here Viktor Frankl's insight is vital. The antidote to suffering is not pleasure, but meaning. The addict cannot be freed merely by removing the substance. They must be given a reason to live without it. Likewise, each of us must ask, what is the life worth enduring discomfort for? What purpose is large enough to command my loyalty more than craving does? This is where creativity, love, and service emerge as weapons of rebellion. To create is to redirect the hunger for destruction into the hunger for expression. To love truly, deeply, without illusion is to break the cycle of trauma by refusing to pass the wound forward. To serve is to step beyond the prison of self, to discover that freedom is not only personal, but communal. Of course, rebellion is not glamorous. It does not happen overnight. The craving does not vanish after a single insight. You will fall, relapse, return again and again to the fire. But each time you return with greater awareness, the fire loses some of its power. Each act of conscious refusal builds resilience. Over time, the compulsion that once seemed absolute reveals itself as fragile. There is a story told in Zen about a man chased by a tiger. He runs to the edge of a cliff, only to find another tiger waiting below. Desperate, he clings to a vine, dangling between death above and death below. At that moment, he notices a single wild strawberry growing near the vine. He plucks it, places it in his mouth, and whispers, "How sweet it tastes." The story is not about escape. It is about presence. To rebel is not to eliminate danger or craving. It is to live fully, even in their shadow. Destructive desires may never vanish completely. But when you no longer serve them blindly, when you can taste the strawberry despite them, you are free. Rebellion, then, is not the fantasy of perfection. It is the courage to live awake. To walk into the day aware of your cravings, yet not enslaved by them. To recognize the systems exploiting your weaknesses, yet refuse to be reduced to them. To know your shadow, yet stand in the light. This kind of rebellion does not make headlines, but it transforms lives. It creates individuals who cannot be manipulated by fear or bribed by shallow pleasure. And perhaps most importantly, it prepares the ground for the final step, not merely breaking free, but realizing the ultimate truth hidden inside the paradox of craving itself. Because if destruction can so powerfully enslave us, perhaps it also holds the key to our deepest liberation. Imagine you've walked this entire path through the shadowed basement of the psyche, through the ruin of unseen consequences, through the raw rebellion of refusing what once enslaved you. And now, after all the struggle, you arrive at a question. More unsettling than the first, what if our craving for what destroys us is not a curse, but a teacher? It is tempting to see destructive desire only as an enemy. Yet, like all great paradoxes, there is another side to it. Perhaps these cravings, these compulsions, not simply flaws in the design of humanity, but signals pointing toward a truth. Too immense to ignore? Think of fire. Left uncontrolled, it devours forests, homes, entire civilizations. Yet without fire, there is no warmth, no forging of tools, no transformation of raw material into sustenance. The same energy that destroys is also the energy that creates. What if our cravings are like that? Not raw fire? Dangerous, yes, but also essential to becoming fully alive. Here lies the ultimate truth. We crave what destroys us not only because we are weak, but because buried within destruction is a strange kind of transcendence. Destruction strips away illusion. It burns off the masks, the comforts, the false securities we cling to. In its wake, if we are willing to endure the flames, something clearer, purer, more authentic can emerge. This is why Dostoevsky suggested that suffering is not only inevitable, but necessary, that without confronting despair, no true consciousness awakens. This is why Nietzsche spoke of amor fati, the love of fate, not as blind acceptance, but as the fierce embrace of even the darkest experiences, as part of the path toward becoming. To crave destruction, then, is to unknowingly seek transformation. We are drawn to what undoes us, because, in some hidden way, we long to be remade. But there is a razor's edge here. For some, destruction consumes completely, leaving only ruin. For others, it becomes initiation, a doorway into deeper truth. The difference lies not in the craving itself, but in the consciousness we bring to it. When we are unconscious, craving leads to repetition, the bottle, the betrayal, the endless cycle. But when we awaken, when we dare to ask why, when we face the shadow instead of running from it, the same craving becomes a path of initiation. Addiction reveals the depth of our wounds. Toxic love exposes the patterns we inherited. Self-sabotage unmasks the parts of us still hiding in fear. What once enslaved us can, if faced fully, become the very fire that sets us free. This is the final realization. Liberation is not the absence of craving. It is the transformation of craving. You will always hunger. This is the nature of being human. To be alive is to yearn, to ache, to reach beyond yourself. The tragedy is not that we crave. The tragedy is that we settle for cravings too small, too shallow, too destructive, because they mimic the intensity we truly seek. What is it we are actually longing for beneath the surface of destructive desire? Perhaps it is wholeness. To return to the parts of ourselves we abandoned, to heal the fractures left by trauma, to reconcile with the shadow. Or perhaps it is transcendence itself, the longing to dissolve the boundaries of the self, to feel union with something greater. Whether we call it love, truth, or God, destructive cravings are counterfeit versions of this deeper hunger. Drug mimics transcendence but collapses into ruin. The toxic relationship mimics wholeness but repeats the wound. The endless scrolling mimics connection but leaves us emptier. The craving itself is not the enemy, is the misdirection, the confusion of mistaking the shadow for the light. So the task is not to eradicate craving, but to reorient it. To aim the fire at something worthy of its power. To let the hunger burn not for the cheap substitutes of comfort, but for the radical pursuit of truth, meaning, and depth. This is why great spiritual traditions do not tell us to kill desire, but to transmute it. Mystic does not escape craving, he burns with it, but his fire is aimed at the infinite. The artist does not deny craving, she channels it into creation, shaping pain into beauty. The lover does not fear craving, he lets it open him to the raw vulnerability of connection. And so the final invitation is this. Do not merely ask, why do I crave what destroys me? Ask instead, what is the deeper longing hidden inside this? Craving? What is the truth it points toward, disguised in broken form? Perhaps you crave the drink because you long for surrender, the relief of letting go. Perhaps you crave the toxic lover because you long for intimacy, so badly that you are willing to endure pain for its counterfeit. Perhaps you crave the endless distraction because you long for transcendence, to be lifted out of the smallness of daily life. When you see the truth beneath the craving, you can redirect it. This is the alchemy of desire, to turn the lead of destructive craving into the gold of awakening. And it leads us to the most powerful realization of all. Destruction is not the opposite of life. Destruction is part of life's cycle: death, feeding birth, endings, creating beginnings. What we crave in its darkest form may be the unconscious. Attempt to participate in that cycle, to dissolve in order to be reborn. The tragedy is not in the craving, but in mistaking literal destruction for symbolic transformation. The final step is to choose consciously. To die to the old self without destroying the body, to let go of illusions without annihilating hope, to burn away falseness without losing the core of who you are. This is the true rebellion, the true liberation. Not escape, but transfiguration. So here you are, at the end of the journey. Look back at the paradox that began it. Why do we crave what destroys us, and now see it with new eyes? We crave it because beneath destruction lies the possibility of rebirth. We crave it because the fire that consumes can also purify. We crave it because we are not only afraid of death, we are afraid of living fully, and destruction forces us closer to that edge. The final truth is both terrifying and liberating. You will always crave, but you do not have to crave blindly. You can aim the fire. You can let it burn away what is false and reveal what is real. The choice is yours. And perhaps as you sit in the quiet after these words, you will hear that faint whisper again, the craving rising within you. But this time, instead of obeying it or repressing it, you might pause, might ask, what deeper longing is this pointing toward? What fire is waiting to be transformed? And in that pause, you may discover that the very thing you thought would destroy you has become the doorway into a life more vivid, more authentic, more free than you ever imagined.